Have you ever wondered how it feels to be rejected by your mother-in-law? Well, here is a story of a girl being rejected by her mother-in-law. Welcome to my channel African Tales by Jay. In this channel, we bring to you captivating and interesting story from all angles that will make your day. Please like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so whenever I drop an amazing story you will be the first to get notified. Amara was a simple girl from a small village, surrounded by tall trees and rivers that sang sweet songs. Her family was poor, but they were happy. However, they knew that life was hard, and they wanted Amara to have a better future. Amara and her mother sells yam in the market. That way they used the money to feed themselves. One day as Amara and her mother were walking to the market, they heard the voice of the village town crier delivering a message from the palace. They stood there listening to what the town crier is saying. "Good morning, my people, the palace of this beautiful kingdom need a maid," he says. Amara's parents heard the news and they decide to send Amara to the palace to work. "Amara, Amara," her parents called out. Amara rushed in. "Amara," her father begins with a soft voice, "your mother and I want you to go and work in the palace. We heard they are looking for a maid." Amara's face turned pale. "But father, why?" "Amara, this is for the best," her mother said, wiping away a tear. "You will learn many things in the palace, and maybe, just maybe, you will have a better life." With a heavy heart, Amara packed her small bag and said goodbye to her family. The journey to the palace was long, and Amara couldn't help but wonder what life in the palace would be like. She had heard stories about the royal family, about their riches and their power. But Amara was just a poor girl. She did not think she would ever cross paths with the prince. When Amara arrived at the palace, she was amazed by its beauty. The walls were tall and decorated with gold, and the gardens were filled with flowers of every color. But Amara knew she was there to work, not to admire the beauty. She was assigned simple tasks like sweeping the floors and washing the dishes. For the first few days, Amara kept to herself. She was shy and afraid of making mistakes. One day, while she was cleaning the courtyard, she saw a young man sitting under a tree, reading a book. He was dressed simply, but there was something about him that made Amara curious. As the days passed, Amara noticed that the young man would always sit under the same tree, reading the same book. One day, she gathered her courage and asked, "What are you reading?" The young man looked up and smiled. "It's a story about a prince who falls in love with a commoner." Amara smiled back, not knowing that she was speaking to the prince himself. After that day, Amara and the young man, who was indeed the prince, began to talk more often. Amara was surprised by how kind he was. He didn't act like the other royals, he was humble and treated her like an equal. They talked about many things, the palace, the people, and even their dreams. The prince told Amara that he often felt lonely in the palace. Despite all the wealth and luxury, he longed for something real, something that could not be bought. Amara, on the other hand, shared stories about her village, her family, and the simple joys of her life. One day, the prince asked Amara, "If you could have anything in the world, what would it be?" Amara thought for a moment. "I would want my family to be happy and healthy. That's all I could ever ask for." The prince was touched by her selflessness. He had met many people who only wanted riches and power, but Amara was different. She was pure and kind, and he found himself drawn to her. As the days turned into weeks, the bond between Amara and the prince grew stronger. They would spend hours talking, laughing, and even dreaming about what the future might hold. Amara didn't realize it, but the prince was falling in love with her. The prince's mother, the queen, had noticed the change in her son. She saw how he would often smile to himself, how he would spend more time in the courtyard than in the grand halls of the palace. The queen was suspicious, and one day, she followed the prince to the courtyard. What she saw made her blood boil. Her son, the future king, was talking and laughing with a mere maid. The queen couldn't believe it. She had always dreamed of her son marrying a princess from a powerful kingdom, someone who could bring wealth and alliances to their land. But here he was, wasting his time with a girl from the streets. The queen decided to put an end to it. She summoned all the princesses from different kingdoms and arranged a grand ball. The prince was to choose a bride from among them. When the prince heard of his mother's plan, he was furious. He did not want to marry any of the princesses. His heart belonged to Amara. But he knew that defying his mother would not be easy. The queen was powerful, and she would do anything to get her way. The prince went to Amara that night. "I have to tell you something," he said, his voice filled with worry. "My mother is planning a ball. She wants me to choose a bride from the princesses who will come." Amara felt her heart sink. She knew this day would come, but she never imagined it would be so soon. "What will you do?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I will not choose any of them," the prince said firmly. "My heart belongs to you, Amara. But I need to find a way to prove it to my mother." The prince thought long and hard about how he could prove his love for Amara. He knew that his mother would never accept her unless he could show that Amara was more than just a maid. After much thought, he came up with a plan. He decided to put all the princesses, including Amara, through a secret test. The test would be simple but meaningful. The prince wanted to see who truly loved him for who he was, not for his title or wealth. He arranged for the test to take place during the ball. Each princess would be given a task, something small but important, to see how they would respond. When the night of the ball arrived, the palace was filled with music and laughter. The princesses, dressed in their finest gowns, were eager to impress the prince. Amara, on the other hand, felt out of place. She was just a maid, and she didn't belong in a world of royalty and riches. But the prince had a plan. He approached each princess and asked them for a favor. Some were asked to fetch something for him, others to help with a small chore. But when the prince asked Amara for a favor, it was different. "Amara, I need your help," the prince said softly. "I want you to do something very important for me." Amara looked into the prince's eyes and saw the sincerity in them. She nodded. "Anything for you, my prince." The prince handed her a small, simple ring. "This was my mother's ring, given to her by my father. It means a lot to me, and I want you to keep it safe." Amara was surprised but honored. She carefully took the ring and placed it in her pocket. "I will guard it with my life," she promised. As the night went on, the prince kept an eye on all the princesses. Some were eager to show off their beauty and wealth, while others tried to charm the prince with sweet words. But the prince was not impressed. He was waiting for something more, something real. Finally, the moment came. The prince gathered all the princesses in the grand hall. He explained that he had given a small task to each of them, something that was important to him. He then asked each princess to present what they had done. One by one, the princesses stepped forward. Some had completed their tasks with ease, while others had failed. But when it was Amara's turn, she hesitated. She knew she was just a maid, and she didn't want to embarrass the prince. But the prince encouraged her. "Amara, show them what you have." With trembling hands, Amara pulled out the ring. "This is the ring you gave me," she said softly. "I have kept it safe, just as you asked." The prince smiled and took the ring from her. "Thank you, Amara. You have done well." Then, turning to the crowd, the prince declared, "This ring is a symbol of true love. It was given to my mother by my father as a sign of his love for her. And now, I give it to the one who has shown me the most love tonight." The crowd gasped as the prince placed the ring on Amara's finger. "Amara, you have proven that your love is true. You have cared for me not as a prince, but as a person. And for that, I choose you." The queen was furious. She had never been so humiliated in her life. How could her son choose a mere maid over the princesses from powerful kingdoms? She couldn't accept it. "Stop this nonsense!" The queen shouted, her voice echoing through the hall. "This girl is not worthy of you, my son. She is nothing but a servant." The prince stood firm, holding Amora's hand. "Mother, I love her. She has shown me more love and kindness than anyone else. I don't care about titles or wealth. I want to marry someone who loves me for who I am." The queen's eyes burned with anger, but she knew she couldn't force her son. She had always been a strong and determined woman, but this was something she could not control. She glared at Amora, her voice cold and sharp. "You will regret this, Amora. Mark my words." Amora felt a shiver run down her spine. She had never seen the queen so angry, and she feared what might happen next. But the prince squeezed her hand, reassuring her that he would protect. The days that followed were tense. The queen refused to speak to the prince, and the atmosphere in the palace was thick with unspoken words. Amora tried to keep her head down, focusing on her work, but she could feel the weight of the queen's anger on her shoulders. The prince, however, remained by Amora's side. He assured her that everything would be fine, but Amora could sense the strain in his voice. The queen was not one to give up easily, and Amora feared what she might do next. Rumors began to spread through the palace. Some of the servants whispered that the queen was planning to send Amora away, to banish her from the palace. Others said that the queen was searching for a way to force the prince to marry one of the princesses. Amora tried to ignore the gossip, but it was hard not to be afraid. One day, the prince came to Amora with a worried look on his face. "My mother has summoned the elders," he said. "She's going to ask them to intervene. They have the power to decide who I can and cannot marry." Amora's heart sank. The elders were wise and respected, but they were also traditional. They would likely side with the queen, believing that the prince should marry a princess. Amora didn't know what to do. "I don't want to lose you, Amora," the prince said, his voice filled with emotion. "But I don't know how to fight this." Amora looked into the prince's eyes and saw the love he had for her. It gave her strength. "We will face this together," she said softly. "No matter what happens, we have each other." The day of the meeting with the elders arrived, and the atmosphere in the palace was tense. The queen, dressed in her finest robes, greeted the elders with a polite smile, but there was a coldness in her eyes. The prince stood by Amora's side, holding her hand tightly. The elders listened carefully as the queen presented her case. She spoke of tradition, of the need for a strong alliance through marriage, and of the importance of maintaining the royal bloodline. She argued that the prince's choice was a threat to the stability of the kingdom. When it was the prince's turn to speak, he took a deep breath. "I respect our traditions, and I understand the importance of alliances," he said. "But I also believe in love. I have found someone who loves me not for my title, but for who I am. That is more valuable to me than any alliance." The elders listened in silence, their faces unreadable. When the prince finished speaking, they turned to Amora. "Do you truly love the prince?" one of the elders asked. "Yes," Amora replied, her voice steady. "I love him with all my heart." The elders exchanged glances, and for a moment, the room was filled with a heavy silence. Finally, the eldest of them spoke. "We have heard both sides, and we understand the concerns of the queen," he said slowly. "But we also see the sincerity in the prince's heart. Love is a powerful force, and it is not to be taken lightly." He paused, his gaze resting on Amora. "We will not stand in the way of true love. If the prince wishes to marry this girl, we will not oppose it." The queen's face turned pale with anger, but she knew better than to argue with the elders. Their decision was final. Though the elders had spoken, the queen was not ready to accept defeat. She was determined to keep Amara away from her son. That night, she summoned Amara to her chambers, her eyes cold and calculating. "Amara," the queen began, her voice low, "I will make you an offer. If you leave the palace and never see my son again, I will give you and your family enough gold to live in comfort for the rest of your lives." Amara was shocked. The offer was tempting. With that much gold, her family would never have to worry about anything again. But the thought of leaving the prince, the man she loved, was unbearable. "No, Your Majesty," Amara said firmly. "I cannot accept your offer. My heart belongs to the prince, and I will not leave him." The queen's eyes narrowed. "You are a fool, Amara. Do you really think you can be happy in this palace, surrounded by people who look down on you? You will never be one of us." Tears welled up in Amara's eyes, but she stood her ground. "I may not be a princess, but I love your son with all my heart. That is all that matters." The queen's face twisted with rage. "You will regret this, Amara. I promise you that." Days passed, and the tension in the palace grew. The queen's anger was like a dark cloud hanging over Amara and the prince. But despite everything, their love only grew stronger. The prince began to make plans for their future. He knew that marrying Amara would not be easy, but he was determined to make her his wife. He spoke to the king, his father, who, unlike the queen, was more understanding and supportive of his son's decision. The king saw the love between his son and Amara, and he knew that it was real. He gave his blessing, telling the prince that true happiness was more important than any alliance. Finally, the day of the wedding arrived. The palace was filled with guests from far and wide, all curious to see the girl who had won the prince's heart. Amara, dressed in a simple but elegant gown, walked down the aisle with her heart pounding in her chest. As she reached the prince, she looked into his eyes and saw the love that had brought them to this moment. The prince took her hand and smiled. "I love you, Amara," he whispered. "I love you too," Amara replied, her voice trembling with emotion. The ceremony was beautiful, and as the prince and Amara exchanged their vows, the entire palace was filled with a sense of peace and joy. Even the queen, though still bitter, could not deny the love between them. After the wedding, the prince and Amaz lived happily together. They faced many challenges, but their love only grew stronger with time. Amara's family was brought to the palace, and they were given a place of honor, no longer living in poverty. The queen, though still distant, eventually came to accept Amara. She saw how much her son loved her and how happy they were together. In time, she realized that love was more important than power or wealth. And so, the story of Amara and the prince became a legend in the kingdom, a tale of true love that triumphed over all obstacles. They lived happily ever after, proving that love, when true, can conquer anything. Thank you for watching this wonderful story. I will be dropping the next part of the story soon. Please like, subscribe and turn on the notification bell to get notified whenever I drop the next episode. Stay safe, bye.